Hey folks, this is Paul talking about A Course in Miracles. Today I'm going to be looking closely at forgiveness. What is forgiveness? This is a question that has been resurfacing many times over the course of time, and I've made several videos where I've said, well, I used to not think I knew what forgiveness was, and now it seems to be something even bigger, something deeper. And the past few weeks I've been looking at the forgiveness of abuse quite deeply and gaining some insight into the victim role and how you forgive something that's where someone has very strongly attacked you, and looking at being mistaken and why forgiveness is justified. Now, Holy Spirit has been guiding me to start with, I always like to kind of start at the top, at the beginning, because that puts everything in its proper perspective. So at the start, you're in heaven and you have the truth and you know what everything is and you're not confused, and the truth is given by God and you accept it and you know it's real and it's clear and obvious and you're not confused or mistaken. And in that state, it's very, very clear to you that only the truth is true, nothing else is true, that separation is impossible, that you can't be where God is not, that nothing real can be threatened and you cannot sin, you can't attack anything, you can't be attacked, everything is immortal, everything is holy and innocent permanently because that's how God created it. You can't do or be anything other than what God created you to be. You don't have any abilities other than what He gave you. It's a recognition of perfection. And in that recognition, there is the awareness that nothing unreal exists, and that which is impossible is impossible. You cannot be something you're not. You cannot attack anything real. You can't make God go away. And so long as you maintain that right-mindedness, that sanity, you're fine. So then we have this separation idea. And now this is where you simply become mistaken. Because in truth, for example, God is everywhere. You cannot be anywhere other than where God is. There is nowhere that He isn't. He's infinite. So in the mad idea, the tiny mad idea, you sort of suggested, well, maybe there is somewhere that God doesn't exist. And this isn't possible. So by believing that that's possible, you have to be mistaken. You have to go into a state of denial, and now you're not really changing the facts. You're not really stopping God from being everywhere, but you're just sort of saying, I don't want to acknowledge that that's true. I don't want to recognize that it's true. I want to insist and demand and try to convince myself that something else is true, and that somehow there's a possibility that God isn't everywhere. And this, it doesn't stop God from being everywhere. It's just kind of a blindness. It's an unwillingness to see the truth. And so a person goes into this state and they're in a state of denial. The mind is shutting out the awareness of what the truth is and doesn't want to look at it, doesn't want to admit that it's true, that it's still true. And so that puts your mind into kind of a state of denial, a state of kind of unconsciousness, unawareness, avoidance, not wanting to accept the truth, wanting something else to be true other than what is true. And in that state, that is not a state of sin. It's a state of just being mistaken. So if you've just made a mistake, as what the Course refers to is the difference between sin and error, where a sin would be something that that has been a real attack. It's a real possibility. It's had real consequences. And an error is simply a mistake that you've made that can be corrected without having to have any guilt or punishment. So an analogy I like to use is like someone takes a math test, or some kind of exam, and you've got these questions on the test, and it's asking you to give the right answer. And you go through the motions, and you read the question, and then you give an answer, and you believe that this answer is true, and you think it's correct and accurate. But in this one case, this answer is not correct. Even though that's what you believe is the correct answer. You think it's true, but it isn't. And so all that's happened is that you've made a mistake. So maybe you made a mistake in the calculation. Maybe you pushed the wrong number in the calculator. Maybe you added something up incorrectly. It's just a mistake. It doesn't call for punishment. It doesn't call for guilt. So if the teacher was a good teacher, they would come along and say, well, on this particular one you made a mistake. And then they would help you to see what the error is and explain it and educate you as to why this is a mistake. They would show you an example of a bigger picture truth that reveals the obviousness of why it's a mistake, and then you'd learn and you would open up to and recognize, yeah, I understand, that makes sense, I can see where I went wrong. You admit to being mistaken, and now you can recognize what the real truth is. And now you've been corrected and you've received correction. Nowhere in there was there any sense of shame and punishment and guilt and making the student wrong for having made a mistake, or having to go through a long drawn out suffering just because you came up with the wrong answer. So that mistake in the test is just an error, and it can be corrected, and it can be corrected lovingly, it can be corrected gently and with education and with openness and willingness and cooperation. It doesn't have to be something that's drilled into you. It doesn't have to be something that's smacked over your head so that you'll get it, just to make you motivated to try to learn it out of suffering. So that non-judgmental correction is forgiveness, because if the teacher is really truly being loving and wants you to learn and isn't trying to force you to be stuck in the wrong answer and isn't going to hold it against you, and there's no punishment or consequences, then you have this sort of happy learner, this situation where you want to learn from what you've been mistaken about, and you want to learn what the truth is and get the right answer and integrate the truth to become correct, to become the truth again, so that you're not mistaken. You've got this passion for learning this subject, and you you want to know how it all works, and you want to learn what the workings of the topic is. You want to take it on the truth. You're not trying to sort of stubbornly say, I don't want to learn this. So you can just be mistaken without any sense of heavy punishment coming into it, and you can be corrected without any requirement for any kind of aggressive attack happening in order to try to get you to coerce you into the truth thing. So when you believe that something is true and correct but it isn't, all that you are is simply mistaken. You've just made a little mistake in judgment. You've reasoned something out and you've made a mistake. You did something wrong. You didn't account for something. You didn't notice something didn't seem to add up to you, and you made an error, and it's sent you down the wrong path, but just by mistake. It's not like you're not committing a freaking crime. It's not a sin, but it is mistaken, and it does need to be corrected. And this is how the Course in Miracles is viewing forgiveness, that the entire separation from God and all of the stuff in the world and all of the egos, all forms of attack, all suffering, all sickness, murder and death, is entirely a state of being mistaken and nothing else. It's just a bunch of people who have misstepped, been confused, made poor choices based on faulty information, didn't have all the facts, were blind, relied on their own evaluation and judgment of things and made an error, and didn't realize they were making an error, not recognizing what the truth is, and ending up going down a path that is sort of a whole cascade, a whole sequence of mistakes based on false premises that leads to getting into trouble, getting into configurations of the mind, into conditions of the body, into relationship state, into various sort of forms of error, various end results of mistaken thought processes that on the surface look like a world of insane psychopathic killers. And it's just people being very mistaken, being confused. So the whole separation from God is all based on the simple idea that you've taken what's true and you've confused it with what is false. And you've taken stuff that's false and you've confused it with what's true. You've swapped them around because you have failed to recognize and know what the truth is. So you're out of touch with reality, out of touch with the truth. Something false appears to be true, so this is now an illusion. You've got this illusion that it's something that it's not. So every illusion is like an appearance that tempts you, that seems like it's something, but it actually is something else. Something is false, something is not true, but it seems to be true and it seems to have reality. If you believe that it's true when it isn't, you're not recognizing it for what it is. So here you've got a lie, someone's told a nasty lie. If you think it's true and you fall for it, you have been deceived. You've fallen for an illusion. You've looked at this lie, you haven't recognized it as a lie, and you're looking at it and you're thinking, this is the truth. I believe this and I agree with this. And you invest it with conviction. You say, I approve of this. This seems to make sense to me. It has truth, it has validity, it's rational, it's reasonable. And you say, oh, okay, I accept this is the truth. And it's not. It's a lie. So that you've been tempted to believe that something that is appearing to be something other than it is that thing. You're confused because you've lost sight of what the truth really is. You're out of touch with reality. You don't remember what real stuff looks like. You don't remember what the truth is, what its nature is. So over here you're like, well, I think this thing might be the truth, actually. And so this swapping of true and false disguises the truth as something false, and disguises false things, unreal things, untrue things, as something true and real. And if it requires for you to believe in, to give truth to see reality in the thing that is false of your own free will, in order for you to be convinced that this is the truth, to accept it into your mind and give it reality. So what happens is, no matter where you are, it's psychologically, no matter how sane or insane you are, everyone always has a sense of what is true, what is real. And you can associate and align that sense of truth with God's truth, or you can align it with total lies, complete fiction, unreality, and impossibility of the ego. And whatever you attach it to, whatever you think is true, everyone always thinks that something is true, that everyone always has a sense of truth and reality. It's what I've accepted, what I believe in, what I value, what I think is valid, what is correct, what is acceptable to me, what I think is natural. That's my sense of truth. Everyone has that, and you can never lose it. But you can be confused about what is true and whether it's true or not. So, because God gave you the power in your mind to be able to deny your power. He gave you the free will to be able to use free will, to try not to have free will, to try to will against your own will, to deny that you even have freedom. You technically are able to do that within the laws of God, without violating or breaking any laws or adding any abilities that He didn't give you. It doesn't make sense to go into using your freedom to try to stop yourself from being free, because nothing can come of it. It doesn't make sense to use the power of the mind that can create to try to create nothing, or to create emptiness or lack, because you are not going to create anything. To try to use God's will against God is impossible in truth, and when you try to do it, you become unwilling, saying, I don't want to do God's will, I'm unwilling to will. And then you don't will. So nothing happens. So in this resistance against God, you're not really doing anything. The separation doesn't occur, and it's really a state of denial and just trying not to live and trying not to exist, trying not to cause anything. So it's a bit pointless to suggest that just because God gave you the freedom to be able to deny creation, there's no point in doing it, because it doesn't produce anything useful. It doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't give you anything. It takes stuff away, makes you suffer, makes you unhappy. It's futile. So it's like saying God is everywhere. There's nowhere that God is not. In my egotism and in my separation idea, I want to insist that there's some way that it's possible that God is not everywhere, that there's somewhere that God is not. The world was made as an attack on God, as a place where God could enter not. An attempt to make a place where God doesn't exist cannot work, because God is everywhere. It is impossible to make a place where God is not. But if you insist that it's possible, you'll make an illusion that it's possible, because you're not recognizing what's true, so you're believing in a lie, and you're thinking that you've done it and that you can do it, while at the same time you're not doing it, because you cannot make the place where God is not. So you've got this falsehood, this lie, this fiction, this dream, this desire. I want there to be a place that God doesn't exist, trying to give it reality, trying to make it true, trying to be convinced by it, wanting to be deceived by it, to be tempted by it, so you can buy into it, to try to force it to be reality. But it can never be reality, because in reality God is everywhere. You cannot change the truth. So you can pretend that it's not true, you can deny that it's true, you can believe things that are not true and try to make them true, but even in the strongest effort possible to make unreality real, you cannot succeed. It is not possible to make God go away. So in the big picture, it's futile, it's pointless, it's a waste of time. In a similar vein to how God gave you eternal life, you already are immortal and you already have eternal life. You will live forever. If you attempt to prove that that's not true, perhaps by pretending that you are something that can suffer, you are immortal and you cannot die, but you can confuse yourself with things that do. If you take something that's not yourself, like a body, and you pretend to be a body, and then you make the body suffer and die to try to convince yourself that you don't have eternal life, it is pointless and futile and a waste of time. Jesus says, "Swear not to die, you holy Son of God. You've made a bargain that you cannot keep." You're trying to make this bargain that somehow it's possible for you to not exist. It isn't possible, and it never will be possible, because God is holding you in permanent eternal life forever. So death is denial of life, eternal life. It's an attempt to pretend that you're not alive. It's an attempt to disguise your immortality by pretending to be mortal and pretending to be a body, and then attacking the body, destroying the body, to try to make proof that you have been killed and you've killed the Son of God and you can be killed, to attempt to change the truth and to stop yourself having eternal life. But you cannot do that. You don't have the power to change God's will that He has already finished and accomplished, giving you immortality forever. So in death, it's a pointless exercise. You are free to deny that if you want. You're free to use your free will to pretend that it's true that you can die. You can be in denial, you can reject reality and come up with this nice scenario where something seems to die, and you can identify with it and pretend that it's you. But it has no effect on the truth. It cannot change the facts. So death is not death. Death is denial. It is a lie. It is an illusion of death. It is pretend. So any attempt to make it happen is you being mistaken. It's just you trying to claim that something's possible that is not possible. So if you're claiming it, you're just making a mistake. If you believe it, you are mistaken. If you're trying to pull it off, if you're trying to destroy the body and attack it and make it dead, it's because you are mistaken. You believe that you can do something that you cannot do. You believe that you are something that you are not. It's just an error that you're making in your thought system and in your beliefs and in your judgment. You have literally claimed something that is not true. You're saying, I am a body. That is not true. It can never be true. God did not create you as a body. You are a immortal spirit. So identifying with a body, trying to be a body, looking in the mirror and saying, look, how do I look today? You must be deceived. If I'm looking in the mirror and saying, I look this way today and my hair's doing this and I need to do that, you are confused. You're confused about who you are. You are mistaken about who you are. You are, Jesus says in the Course, what you are cannot be seen or pictured. You are spirit. You are invisible to the body. The body is not the means by which the real world can be seen. These eyes made not to see will never see. You cannot use these eyes to see yourself. So when you think you are, these eyes have never looked at you. When you think that you are, you're not sinning, you're just mistaken. You're confused. You just are out of touch with reality and truth. You're just sort of claiming something that is inaccurate. It is incorrect. You've just made a mistake. And you need correction. Therefore, you need someone or something to come along, Holy Spirit or truth or whatever, your willingness to not only recognize that you probably are in a mistaken state, but to also then look and see, how is it that I am mistaken? What is the mistake I'm making? And what is the bigger truth? What is the real answer? What's the real truth that I need to accept? And ultimately it's what we call the atonement. It's forgiveness. It's the reality that when you're believing that illusions are real, you're out of touch with reality, and reality is heaven. It's the actual real existence, how things really are, and recognizing it is sanity, and accepting it fully is atonement, and aligning with it is forgiveness, being in your right mind, having accurate, true perception. So even if you've got someone who is very violent and very aggressive and attacking and abusing and hurting people, murderous, this person is not sinning. This person is very confused. This person is very mistaken. They believe a lot of things that are not true. And all of these false beliefs and these lies, these deceptions, this denial that this person is in, has distorted their perception and it's distorted their mind, and they're not seeing reality, and they're not sane. Jesus says in the Course, sin is insanity. They've become unnaturally twisted because of the various mistakes that they've made in their psychology, in the psyche, in the mind, in their belief system, in what they believe is truth and real. It has become mistaken to the point where they now believe a whole bunch of stuff that isn't true, and it is causing them to make all kinds of faulty decisions, to make wrong decisions, to choose on their own in a mistaken state, and to come up with justification, what seems to be logical even, that it even makes sense. If somebody If somebody thinks that something that's very false is true, and they're very mistaken about it, they nevertheless believe in it, and they believe that it's very, very true, it's very correct, and they accept it. And I forgot what I was going to say now. Because they think it's true, it forms this kind of system in the mind of logic. It's like saying, if this is true, then it also follows that this is true. Or if this is the premise of what I believe is true, then also this must be true. And because this is true, that must be false. And it's talking about psychology, or the psychologic. It's the state of the logic of the mind based on where you're putting your truth, what you're associating your truth with. And if you've associated all your truth with things that aren't true, you have changed the logic of your thinking, and you've changed the way that you reason, and you've changed the kind of conclusions that you come to. So now you keep making a lot of false conclusions based on false premises, based on lies, based on being deceived, based on being out of touch with reality. It starts to produce more confusion. Jesus says somewhere in there about how the world was made to make guilt real, and it fosters more illusions, and as you look upon it, it brings about even more temptation and more deception, because it kind of builds upon itself. So now if your mind is in this state of being very, very mistaken, and sin doesn't even enter into this. This is just a logical mistake, a mistake in thinking. The person starts to believe that various ways of expressing themselves is completely valid, completely justified, normal, natural, righteous, deserved. That all comes from this basis of what is my truth. And that could mean that the person, even though they're very mistaken, they can believe that killing someone else is a good thing, or that they are justified in vengeance and attacking a person because the person deserves it, or that the person is asking for it, or that they are righteous and deserving of being able to make someone else suffer because they were made to suffer, or all the various ways that an insane person could literally justify it to themselves and say, this is why I'm going to do this. I have a good reason to do this. This is what I want. And people can get into a state where can you imagine the kind of state of mind someone must be in to want to go murder somebody? To have like a willingness and a desire and wanting it, and a sense of desperation and fear and unworthiness and a lack of love and mental confusion and a sense of being separate and alone, and the belief Jesus talks about that in the laws of chaos, that we believe someone else has taken away from us a part of our own self, and that we have to now attack them to get it back. This is all taking place when you've got a mind that is kind of set up in a condition that's very, very convolutedly wrong. It's going to express in ways that we would call inappropriate, in ways that are harmful, ways that are destructive, ways that seem to be a misuse of the mind, or what we'd call miscreation. They have free will. They're free to do this if they want to. God is not going to stop them. although he might encourage them not to do it, but they've made a lot of mistaken decisions, and so the state that they're in is riddled with guilt and sin and fear and loss and lack and deprivation and hurt and their own personal hell. And to try to deal with that, they're going to try to project it and scapegoat somebody and find somebody to be a target and try to attack that in order to get rid of their own burden. So someone became 100% confused, as Jesus says in the Course, that the end result or the logical outcome of the whole ego thought system is total confusion about everything, where a person would be completely out of touch with reality, extremely insane, thinks that everything that's false is truth. And it's not just truth that you give to things, it's truth, it's will, it's mind, it's power, it's acceptability, its value, its validity, its life, and its self, its identity. All of this goes in a package deal, and if you associate it with things that are false, your entire sense of self and life and truth and reality and what is me and what's true of me goes with it, and you become attached to and associated with. Your whole sense of self and identity shifts to match and line up with this picture of what you think the truth is. It defines you. So as people go into believing that something is true that is not true, they're literally saying, I am not God's truth, I am not how I am as God defines me. The truth about me and everything is this, and I am this. And your whole sense of what I am and who I am shifts and goes along with that, as well as your sense of heaven and safety and salvation and what you love. It all gets distorted and associated with things that it is not, causing you to be attracted to guilt and death and murder and attack and suffering and punishment, causing you to believe that death is life, death is a doorway out and it's going to save me, that attack and murder is salvation, that the ego even believes that like torture and torment is healing, and that through death you can become immortal in oblivion. You can exist without God forever. This is what you get to thinking when you are that confused about what's true and what's real. And this drives people to kill themselves. So you've got every death is a suicide, every death is a mistake. Someone is choosing incorrectly, misstepping, going into a lie that they think is the truth, which is actually taking them away from life and away from truth, moving them closer to death, but under the belief that they're getting closer to life and closer to what they want. So, because of this confusion of what's real and what's not real, and we literally start believing that death is life, and attack is going to save you, and like sickness is a defense against the truth. The sickness is going to save my life from God, who I've now believed is false, and God is where all the stuff that's true about things that are false, I assign it to God and say God is the evil one, God is death, God is murder, God is hell, God doesn't exist, God is murderous, attacking, sinful, guilty, wrong, bad, evil, and I want nothing to do with it. That becomes as the Course says, the denial of God is the ego's religion. So this becoming confused about what's true causes you to point a finger at God and give all the attributes of falseness, unreality, non-existence, evil, nothingness to God. And now we think that that's what God's like, because over here we're obsessed with this ego illusion that we don't recognize, and we think this is God. This becomes your God, the God of sickness, the God of suffering, the God of death becomes God to you. And you're very confused, and then you act on the basis, your behavior comes from the basis of your state of mind. It's going to produce a lot of what we would call evil behavior if it's coming from a person's mind who is confused about what's true. And so that person's just going to be doing something potentially what we'd call harmful and abusive, but only because they are mistaken. Their mind is in a state of being mistaken, and they don't recognize it, and they just need some correction from a loving, corrective teacher, such as the Holy Spirit, which would show them the various ways that they have only been confused, would help them to not be confused and to come to their senses, wake up to reality, and get their minds straightened out. And then from that corrected state of mind, which is loving, they would change their behavior and stop being hurtful. So what is a sin? What is sin? I have to ask myself this quite deeply. What we're calling a sin is the state of mind that you're in when you are confused about what's true. It is the insanity. So let's say that all that you've done is made a mistake. You've taken your math test and you calculated your answer, but it was mistaken. You did something wrong by mistake. You weren't malicious. You weren't trying to hurt anyone. You just made an innocent error. This is an important thing we'll come back to in a minute, about recognizing that it's just a mistake, acknowledges your innocence, and that's why it's forgiving. You just make an innocent mistake on your test. It's not a sin. It can be easily corrected. It just calls for correction. It just needs some more education. You just need to learn what the truth really is. If you make a mistake and it's not recognized as a mistake, it's not recognized as a mistake because the real truth is hidden or kept away from you, it makes the mistake seem to have truth, even though it is wrong. So you now have a little bit of insanity, and being in that condition, you're going into sin, which it's hard to describe this. Sin is a mistake that is misperceived. It's a mistake. All that you are is mistaken, but when you're in it and you're psychologically blinded by the mistake and you're convinced that the illusion is true, that the thing is something that it isn't, it suggests that something unloving is truthful. Something not of God has reality. So that now gives truth and validity and reality to something that is destructive, something that's not creative. And it's now suggesting that you, in truth and in reality, have done something that is disconnected from how God is, something evil, something untrue, something unholy, and it's true and it's real, and therefore it is sinful. So it's the combination of the illusion itself, which is just a mistake, and the sense of truth and reality that you give to it that kind of holds it, locks it in, your belief in it, turns that mistakenness into what we're calling sin, because it gives it a sense of validity and a sense of truth, a sense of reality, as if you've really done something wrong, and what you've done isn't just a mistake, it's actually attacking the truth. It's a rejection of God. It's against God's kingdom, and it has reality and it's true, therefore it's got to be evil in some way. And so in this condition of I believe an illusion is true, you are basically believing in sin. You're believing that you are sinful, you're in a state of sinfulness because you're insane. Sin is insanity. And in that state, it seems as though what you're doing has a ceiling of truth and reality, and kind of a bubble of truth that you've given it, that you can't go beyond. When you believe that someone is if someone's being attacking and someone's not in the right mind and they're very confused and mistaken, and they're not fully aware, and they're not fully conscious, and they're not loving, and they're not whole-minded, and they are in their wrong-mindedness, but you are deceived by this illusion, and you buy into it as well, and you believe that this person, you know how that we take the truth and you give truth to wherever you are, no matter whether it's true or not. If you see this person who is mistaken as having truth, and they have reality, and they have wholeness, and you start assuming they are fully aware, they're fully conscious, they know everything, they are completely free-willed, they are completely in control of everything they do, that they are capable of causing things deliberately, everything they're doing is on purpose. If you start believing this about someone who is in a mistaken state, someone is out of touch with reality, and they're not whole, and they're not correct, and they don't have the truth, and they're not able to make deliberate, fully conscious choices, and they're not able to be fully aware of all the consequences of what they do, and they're in denial of the golden rule, and this person is distorted. If you don't recognize that that is their mistaken state, if you don't see the ways that they're mistaken, and you ignore that piece of the information, the bigger picture that frames where they're at correctly and shows that they are mistaken, and you buy into their illusion, and you yourself are deceived, and you believe in things being true that are not true, it will also blind you to the truth and blind you to your mistakenness, and you're in denial. You don't know what the fuck is going on. You're confused and insane, and you're looking at this mistaken person through a lens of being mistaken, being deceived by illusions. You cannot see reality. You're going to take everything this person does as if it is fully truthful, fully real, fully whole-minded, fully intentional. The person deliberately meant to do it. The person knew what they were doing. They were totally in their right mind, and they did something destructive. So that combination of if you believe they were totally not mistaken, they're sane, they're loving, they're fully aware, they're fully mature, they're able to think for themselves and decide everything, and they went ahead and acted destructively because of their mistakenness and the outcome of their own confusion that caused them to express on a false basis, which seems like harm and attack because it's coming from a state of being mistaken. You will believe this person is evil and they are sinful, because if you believe that this person is whole truth, whole reality, knows what they're doing, is totally in control of all their faculties, and they went ahead and did something evil, something not like God, something that only a mistaken person would do, they must have been fundamentally freaking evil. They must have been inherently some kind of evil monster, some kind of sinner, there's something wrong with them that isn't a mistake, and which is some kind of inherent ego, evil, horrifying thing, something about their nature that is corrupt and corruptive. That's what you will perceive in them when you are mistaken and are not recognizing that they are mistaken. And that will cause you to perceive that this person isn't just being mistaken, but that they're fundamentally evil, that something wrong. They are deliberately, intentionally hurtful, that they did this thing just to hurt you on purpose, that they premeditated murder, that they were a highly intelligent, rational, sane human being with a healed mind and wholeness and like a freaking holy person who decided to hurt you on purpose. How evil would they be? That's what you will see if you can't recognize their mistakenness. You think that they are in their right mind when they are not in their right mind. You will attribute to them total ownership and clarity and responsibility for causing sin to happen. And that's your unforgiveness of them, and it's your inability to recognize what's happening. And because of that, you experience it as this person is fucking fucked up in the head, and they are hurting me on purpose, against my will. They are being abusive to me, they are hurting me and attacking me. I didn't ask for it, and they're the one that's wrong, and they're the evil one, and they're doing this fully consciously and on purpose because they're so fucked up. They should know better because of how conscious they are, and I get to be the one that is on the receiving end. And this is how mistakenness is misperceived as sin. That Every single way that somebody could be seemingly destructive, attacking, murderous, damaging is only a person who is confused. This person is not in their right mind. No one in their right mind would ever want to hurt you. Somebody's in the right mind. The right-mindedness is sanity. Right-mindedness is also loving. It is wholeness, it is peaceful, it is truthful, it is innocent. It doesn't even conceive of attack. It doesn't even know how to attack. It doesn't even know what attack is. It is pure, it is holy. That is right-mindedness, that is sanity. That is the natural condition of every mind is peace and holiness and innocence, as God created it. That's its natural condition. So when something's gone wrong and the person has become mistaken, they've simply made a mistake. They've chosen something that they wanted to believe was possible or true that isn't possible and isn't true, but they believe it anyway, so they are confused, they are mistaken. If you don't recognize it as just a mistake, you will interpret it as sin, because it will the person seems to have taken the sense of truth and devolved it into an illusion and assigned it and associated it with destructiveness, and is now showing you a picture of crucifixion, a sick body, an attacking action, harsh words, whatever it is, murderous intent. If you are not in your right mind, you will interpret this as sin and attack and evil, and as abusive and hurtful, and it will frame the whole thing as you being victimized against your will, as the person being an evil, horrible monster that doesn't deserve to be forgiven, and you'll be stuck in that. That is false perception. So it's almost like if you're totally blind to the whole picture, the whole truth, that this person has taken mistaken steps into hell. Jesus talks in the Course about how the ego has taken very neat, orderly, logical steps in the descent into hell. They're logical, they seem to make sense because they're based on false premises, but it's still false. But we've taken those steps, and now if you ignore all the real truth and you just take the face value, falsely perceived, believing in sin, I am mistaken, I'm not in my right mind perception, looking at these people, it gives you a kind of a logic that is very physical based. So now you're looking at what are they physically doing, because we're moving away from spirit and from mind and anchoring into the physical and into what appears to be the logic of the physical level of reality, that this world, the laws of physics and the laws of space-time are the psychological logic of mistakenness. That's why the world is a mistake. That's why Jesus says the world you see is impossible. This world technically cannot exist. There cannot be separate objects. There cannot be bodies in reality. These things literally cannot be there, and they're not there. But we are believing in them and convinced by them, and we're deceived, and we're not in our right minds. So when you get into that state, you start to really look at what happens on a physical level, as if the physical matter, spatially separated out objects in time and space, symbolize mistaken perception. Jesus is literally in the Course, the world is false perception, physical matter is a psychological state of being very mistaken. The world of bodies is the world of sin. The world was made as an attack. It is a picture of crucifixion. It's what you could sort of say, the world is the lower mind. It is the ego. It is an insane world. The world is the world made by minds driven mad by guilt. So when you are not being forgiving, you're in false perception. You've got a big ego problem. You see yourself as a victim, as suffering, as abused, as hurt, as attackable, as vulnerable, etc. Various mistakes that you've made, and you've fallen down into the pits of hell. It starts to align with how physical reality, the illusion of physical reality, is organized. So now in an abusive situation, and forgiveness, we need to do forgiveness not just on, oh, my co-worker said this bad thing today, but also even in the extreme. This person attacked me, this person broke my arm, this person fucking sexually abused me, this person hit me as a child, this person tried to kill me, this person freaking shot me with a gun. These things also have to be forgiven. Everything, even to the most extreme, horrendous, terrifying nightmare, has to be forgiven. The more mistaken that you become, the more the physical world seems real. The more mistaken you become, the more you enter into what we're calling insanity, which is the belief in sin, which frames less than total truths as being the whole truth, causing destructive illusions to appear to have truth to them, making them evil, framing them as not mistakes but as irreversible sins. And that leads to guilt, which leads to sickness and punishment. The more unforgiving you are, the more you will identify with what's physical, therefore, because this is like, the physical is like aligned with mistaken perception. Being very mistaken causes you to be bound to the body. And you will start looking at logic, or what makes sense, based on what's physically happening. So in the worst, most abusive situations, it almost always is coming down to how it looks on the surface, how it seems to happen physically, what they would take a record of in the legal system. Like, here's a person, this person is evil, this person caused something to happen to this body didn't seem to ask for it, this person did it of their own free will against this person has been unfairly treated, this person has been abused against their will, this person didn't ask for it, didn't want it, because this person is innocent. The face of innocence, the body, is a disguise that covers up all this other stuff, all this guilt, all this belief in sin, all this mistakenness, all this confusion is all hidden behind the portrayal of myself as a body, as an innocent victim. It's a way for me to pretend that I am not sinful and I don't have any guilt. And you put on a front, you put on a face, a facade, physical flesh, psychologically induced flesh, which pictures you as you're not, and portrays you as an innocent, attackable thing. Especially if you're young and you're a child or a baby that seems to be innocent and harmless and can be easily abused. So now, if you're focusing solely on this physical proof, the proof of sin, the proof of guilt, the evidence, this person did this to this person in space and time, they caused me, they did this to me, I did this to them, whatever, based solely on the physical appearance, you're very, very lost, very confused, and it kind of locks you into a very closed box of false perception in which you're totally out of touch with real reality. You're very deceived, very tempted, very split-minded, very insane, and very separation-based. And so you're seeing this person over here is very separate from me because they have a separate body. Body is a separation device. I am separate from them because my body is separate from theirs. If their body does something to my body, they are the instigator of the physical act of attack and abuse, and that's their fault. And that's how it's going to look at the most basic level of unenlightenment. The most deceived perception, and it's very tempting because illusions are very deceiving. Physical matter is an illusion. This is an illusory world that isn't really here, that appears to be here because of our frickin' mistakenness. Our insistence that there's an opposite to God which exists, which isn't possible, has made up an illusion of an entire frickin' planet where sin is prevalent, where things can seem to happen that are not possible in reality, where things can seem to be attacked, and where it seems that they're real. And there's real attack, and real sin, and real guilt, and therefore the justification for punishment, and retaliation, and revenge, and people hurting each other. And in that view, you become a victim. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't choose it. I didn't cause it. I didn't have anything to do with making it happen. Didn't invite it. Didn't tempt it. Didn't ask somebody to do this to me. I was completely innocent. That's how we sort of assume we are, especially when conscious awareness is hidden in a little bubble surrounded by blocks to awareness and denial and mistakenness, and we only tend to be aware of the part that we accept as true, and we shut out the stuff that we don't want to admit is in there. And that confines your conscious awareness to a small bubble of, well, if I'm not aware of it, it doesn't exist. If it's not in my mind right now, I'm not doing it. If I'm not aware of how I'm causing this, I mustn't be doing anything to cause this. And the barriers to your awareness that are literally shutting out parts of your mind from your conscious awareness and are preventing you from being aware of what you're doing in the total picture, and is focusing only on the little piece that's right in front of you right now, that is being used to keep that out of your mind and brush it under the carpet. The denial of your mistakenness traps you in a state of mind where you cannot see the whole picture. And when you can't see the whole truth and you think that something that is very much not the truth is true, you believe in the world, you believe in abuse, you believe in attack, you believe in being hurt, you believe in being victimizable. And that means that you believe that you're sinful, and therefore you believe that you're guilty and you deserve to be punished. Here's a truth that may not be popular, and I don't mean to say this to be insensitive to anybody who's been abused. I experienced abuse. I discovered this by healing my own stuff. But there's a sort of a sick seeming thing going on in our minds. It's not that we're really sick people, or that we're evil people, or that we truly are destructive in our true nature. It's just that when we get confused and mistaken about reality, we start doing things that could be described as sick and twisted, that could be described as evil if you were unforgiving, if you didn't recognize that it was just mistakenness and you wanted to point a finger and blame someone and justify revenge or justify someone getting punished. You could say that every person who believes in the separation and believes in the ego is self-destructive and wants to die because they're confused and they think that death is life, and they believe that they've sinned when they haven't, and so they think they deserve suffering and deserve to be punished and hurt and destroyed, that not existing is the truth, that murder is justified and death is justified and revenge is justified. But in our sickness, we actually position ourselves to suffer. We choose to believe in states that produce suffering experiences, states of guilt, unworthiness, states of feeling like we deserve to be punished because we believe that we have really sinned, that this mistake wasn't just a mistake and it was actually the truth, and it was actually real, and that we did it on purpose, and therefore logically you should be guilty for it, and therefore you should be punished and die. The wages of sin is death. Sin demands punishment. Logically, we keep trying to make ourselves a victim. We keep wanting to position ourselves as victimizable, attackable, to be unloved, to be unforgiven, to be found guilty, to be abused, to be hurt and attacked, bullied, to be damaged, to be even killed. Jesus describes in the Course in Miracles about how we believe that if we can frame someone else as being the one to cause the suffering, to inflict the punishment, to bring the attack, if we can bring our awareness so mistaken that all we can see is what happens on a physical level, and you think that this is the logic, the psychology aligns with the physical, you think the mind is the body, we in our denial of our own guilt and our own belief in our own sinfulness, project, disown, dissociate from that baggage and try to escape it and try to get rid of it. And we push it out and we project it onto someone else, and we try to elevate them as cause, as sinner, as power, will, freedom, mind, truth, and we try to diminish ourselves, because all of this mistakenness leads to you becoming small and little and weak and associated with tiny things and in denial of your grandeur, in denial of your unlimitedness. You try to make yourself small and insignificant and weak and vulnerable and attackable, and innocent to hide from your own guilt, pushing that guilt out into the world, projecting it onto other people and onto the world in false, unforgiving perceptions, not recognizing this is just a mistake, they are just mistaken. And we want to frame people and associate our guilt and our sin that we think is true, even though it's not. We want to bind it to people and to bodies and attach it to them and disown it and get rid of it and even attack it to try to make it go away further from us, to pretend that by doing this we're getting it out of our mind, because we think our mind is in our body, and trying to get it outside the body to get rid of it so that we can be innocent and use it as a way to cope with this guilt that we've induced and make someone else guilty. To do this, you have to position yourself as a victim, as being the one who is abused. You have to position yourself as the attacker, the attackee, the recipient, the receiver of the hurt and the punishment and the attack and the murder. And in order to do that, someone else has to be framed and set up and made to believed in and made to look as though they are the cause of what happened. And as you get down to the physical level and down to the false perception and down to not recognizing the mistakenness and buying into illusions, believing that the world is real and so on, you get into the kind of logic that allows you to seem to get away with this, whereby, let's say a person comes along in their car and they drive into you and it kills you, kills your body. The physical causality of that false perception makes it look as though that person is 100% the cause of what happened to you, and you just stood there with your mouth open and screaming and, oh my God, poor me, I'm about to be killed. They do it to you, and you get away with looking like an innocent victim. You get to play the part of not the one who did it. Jesus is talking about in the Course that we get so twisted, so filled with guilt, self-inflicted guilt as a result of not forgiving ourselves, not recognizing that we're just mistaken, that we just need some correction without any punishment and without any suffering. We've made a mistake and we just need to be corrected gently and lovingly. But if we don't recognize that and we're starting to be hard on ourselves, we're in our mistakenness and in our confusion, we think that it isn't a mistake and it's actually a sin, and that we've become evil, and now we're guilty and bad, and now we've got to try and freaking get rid of this horrendous weight of sin and guilt. And we try to do it by disassociating. It splits the mind, and now you're divided against yourself, and now you're attacking yourself, and now you try to pin your sin onto someone else. You can but accuse your brother of your own sins. The sick thing that we do is that as we get into this mode of backwardsness, we try to make out that we are destructible, attackable, vulnerable, weak, hurtable, abusable, a target, cannot be defended, and that in this state we are completely harmless, pure, innocent, guiltless, sinless, not doing anything wrong, minding our own business, totally just passive, while simultaneously, murderously, unconsciously hurling tremendous guilt and sin and belief in things that aren't true outward, distorting perception, framing other people as abusers, attracting them to be that, drawing abuse to yourself, choosing it through this believing in this is what I value, this is what I want, this is what I think is true. I'm very mistaken, and it's insane to believe I want to hurt myself. No one in their right mind would do this, but if you're not in your right mind because you're mistaken and you've gone a bit insane, you will start believing that you deserve abuse, and you'll start trying to do it to yourself, and you'll start trying to make it happen. And in your perceptions and in your expressions and your energy and the power of your mind, you will start trying to organize and arrange and agree to, giving consent that you want someone else to come along and act as though they are this horrible monster that hurts you, attacks you, kills you, abuses you, rapes you, destroys you, whatever, emotional abuse, mental abuse, whatever it is, so that you'll have an opportunity to put all your shit and accusation and sin and blame and desire to find something to be wrong, all of your unforgivingness, all of your unforgiveness of yourself, you put on to someone else. And the more that you unforgive yourself, the more you want to find somebody else to be guilty. The more that you see that you have sinned and you find yourself to be unworthy of forgiveness, you will see that projected out, and you will see other people. I want to find them to also be guilty and unforgivable. When you take it to the extreme, what you find is the total disowning of everything by you, the complete denial of everything, the on the surface looks like you're just this innocent, harmless, gentle little flower that everybody would love. But hidden behind that is horrendous belief in attack upon God, a belief in guilt, shame, unworthiness, a desire to die, a belief in suffering, a guilt and a heaviness, and all this frickin' unconscious denied bullshit that is covered over with this people-pleasing facade, the face of innocence, that positions you as looking like the innocent victim, and then you get this, you shove all this evil, guilty, sinful bullshit outward, and you project it to try to get rid of it, even though it doesn't leave your mind, and now you believe it's in someone else, and it's theirs, and they're the one doing all the shitty bad stuff. You're the one that's the innocent, tiny little, weak, helpless little thing. They come along and seem to do stuff to you. You aren't asking for it. You're passive. You're not even making a choice at all. Jesus talks about how death is an attempt to make no choice at all, to pretend you don't even have a choice, because you want to position yourself as, I have no power to stop this. I have no desire to stop this. I might as well just give up and let you kill me. So that this person can appear to be the sole, clear, it's totally them, very clearly defined. They are the cause of you suffering. They're the one that causes your punishment. They're the one that makes you abused and hurt. And therefore, it exonerates you from your guilt and your sin by being able to stay in a state where you can now keep saying, I hate this person for what they did. They deserve to die. They should be in prison. They should be punished. They should be destroyed. They should be hurt. I hope something bad happens to them. Vicious. Jesus says, and of course, those who are afraid are apt to be very vicious. Even though those who are afraid position themselves as this helpless, oh my God, don't hurt me, vicious attackers. So what we're finding here is that the one that seems to be the victim is actually the victimizer, the one who seems to cause the abuse, who seems to be the victimizer, is being victimized by the victim because they're trying to take this opportunity to frame this person as evil and guilty as much as possible, so that they can, all the attention is taken away from them, all fingers are pointed this way, all of the blame and the accusation is heavily thrown over there so that nobody looks over here. So that this person gets away with murder by having this other person seem to murder them. Jesus says in A Course in Miracles that we are willing to pay this small price if it means that, brother, at your hand I die, because of you I'm dying, I'm being abused and murdered, it's your fault, therefore it's not my fault. So we're actually willing to even hire people, invite people, attract people, choose to go into relationships with people, surround ourselves with people who seem to be independently evil, harmful, because it's a really good opportunity for us to get rid of all this fucking guilt and sin that we can't stand, that we've put on ourselves. If they seem to be acting abusive, negative, destructive, oh, that's pretty convenient for you, because now they have already seemingly of their own free will done a whole bunch of bad stuff. So their record is now tarnished, and they already look like a sinner, and they've already pictured themselves as a sinner. Maybe that's happening. Maybe in their mind they are very mistaken, and that's why they are being abusive. But you then, your ego then sees this and says, well, they're already making a lot of mistakes, they're already sinning, they're already guilty, so I can get in here and take advantage of this opportunity. I don't even hardly have to do anything. All I have to do is lay down and let them do their thing, and it's gonna look as though I didn't ask for it, didn't want it, and they did it to me. And Jesus is teaching here not just about you being killed, you being upset about other people, you being mildly annoyed, you being unhappy. any form of suffering, all forms of sickness, every pain, every physical ailment that you induce through your mistaken state of mind, even death, all forms of sickness, even unto death, are physical expressions of the fear of awakening, that we literally love to make ourselves out to be victims. We love to put on a nice show of being helpless. It's how we deny our immortality. We keep trying to reject our invulnerability. We keep trying to pretend that we can be hurt. Jesus says in the Course, sickness is an attempt to prove you can be hurt, even though in your immortal self you cannot be hurt. So what's the point? So all the sons of God that have come into believing mistakenly in the illusion are trying to portray themselves as in a victim role where something other than themselves chooses for them, attacks them against their will, causes their destruction without them having to lift a finger, so that they can get away with murder and get away with shifting the blame and all the focus onto these evil figures, so that in dying we're even willing to fucking go through death if it means the cause of it is placed anywhere other than on yourself, anywhere other than you choosing it, anything that could possibly make it happen, anything you can blame other than you. I'm sick because of the environment. I am suffering because of the weather. I am dying because a meteorite came along and hit me in the head. I'm on my deathbed in the ICU because somebody shot me with a gun. I have a broken leg because this stupid asshole drove into me with his motorcycle. Whatever it is. We just have this slew of trying to use people to exonerate ourselves of our own sin. Every projection that we make of our own sin, every time you point a finger and say, you did this to me, every single form of that, from the subtle to the extreme, even if it's just, this person cut me off in traffic, how dare they, you're saying the same thing. You're saying, I received something that they caused against my will, I didn't ask for it, I'm the innocent one, I'm justified in anger because I didn't ask for it, I deserve to be, I am righteous and deserving of, I should be angry at this person because of what they did against my will. And now you get to die a little bit and shift the weight of guilt and sin, your mistakenness, your unrecognized mistakenness, onto this other person and frame them in your mind as though they're the fucker that did this to me and I didn't do this, so now you've got rid of some of your guilt. You've positioned yourself as a little bit innocent. You've taken advantage of the opportunity to say, I didn't do this, I don't have any sin in me, it's them. And it goes all the way from, I'm slightly annoyed with you, all the way through, they hurled abuse at me, all the way through, this person physically attacked me, all the way through, they raped me and broke my arms and kept me in the basement for 5 years, all the way through even to they murdered me. Every single part of that, the role that we play, is entirely a bullshit role where we want to be a victim. We want to be abused. We want someone to come along and fucking punish us because we think that we deserve it. We want someone to come along kill us. We want something bad to happen. In the sick, twisted way, we want terrible, shitty things to happen. Because they give us opportunities to scapegoat. They give us an opportunity, a way out, to kind of try to exonerate ourselves of sin and say, well, they're the ones that are guilty, so look at me, everybody, I'm freaking amazing. Now, I had to look at this recently in myself, because I had abuse in childhood. I was physically hit, caned, if I would make certain kinds of mistakes. Now, these mistakes obviously were not sins, and what really should have happened, there should have been loving, gentle correction. There should have been education. There should have been helping me to understand why it was a mistake, or that I'm still loved and still forgiven, and helping me to return to the truth. Because if you think about it, if someone has learned wrong, believes wrongly, is mistaken, and they need to get the truth in order to be corrected, they need to get into the truth. So they have to get into love in order to be in the right mind, which means they have to be loved. They have to be reminded that they are lovable and they're filled with love. And that would be a correction. This is why miracles are healing, and they correct the mind, because they bestow love where it's lacking, because love is the correction, and it heals the distortion in the mind and lifts the mind up into love, into the truth. Now the mind is in a correct state. If you have someone who makes a mistake and someone looks at it as it's not a mistake, it's a sin, it's bad and it's wrong, and we're not going to correct it with truth. We're not going to give the truth in order to correct the mistake. We're going to actually compound the mistake by leaving the person mistaken, finding it to be a sin, establishing that they're guilty, believing that they should be punished, and that this punishment is a correction, and this punishment is going to cause the person to change their mind and become more true. That the punishment is going to rehabilitate them. The punishment is going to correct their misperception and change their beliefs and get them to be more loving. And then the experience will be, well, these people abused me, they hurt me, it's their fault, they did this on purpose, and then you probably will buy into it and say, well, I was bad and I did something wrong and I'm unworthy and I should be ashamed. You have all these reactions to the situation based on how it physically seems to be, and then you yourself buy into sin, and you buy into guilt, and you become mistaken, and you lose track of who you are, and you bring upon yourself the belief that you deserve punishment, even though you felt that you didn't want it. Seems like I lost my microphone for a minute. Just a sec. Apologize for the lack of sound. It must probably be happening for a little bit. Okay. So then you get into this, that you buy into the sin and the guilt, and you start punishing yourself, and you start hating yourself, and now you've got self-abuse and your own belief in unworthiness and the feeling of guilt, and now you feel guilty for what you did wrong. And this doesn't necessarily correct your behavior, it just is like, just makes you broken, makes you worse, makes you less in line with the truth, and now you're acting better because you're more controlled, or you're more afraid of abuse, or you're starting to have to change your behavior or be people pleasing in order not to be attacked, and it all gets into a big fucking mess. And part of that is going to be the projecting and the scapegoating and the blaming, and now it seems you're totally justified in finding this person guilty because they did this to you. So now then you start feeling like, oh, you hate them, they were wrong, why did they do this to me, why didn't they love me, what's wrong with me, something must be wrong with me, how do I get them to love me, trying to coerce them into loving you, hanging on to their affection or their lack of affection, but in particular not forgiving them, being unwilling and unable to forgive them for what they did, because they hurt you, they abused you, they made you feel bad, they gave you pain, they made you suffer, they attacked you and traumatized you. But all this other stuff that I've just been talking about has been happening in the situation. So if unforgiveness is not recognizing that it was just a mistake, forgiveness must entail the recognition that the abusive person is just mistaken. So I had to look at this and recognize they were mistaken for believing that I had sinned. They were mistaken for finding me guilty, because I can't be guilty. They were mistaken for not loving me. They were mistaken for deciding that punishment would actually work. They were mistaken for being unforgiving towards themselves. They were living in fear because they believed something that they were required by the Bible to have to correct a child by hitting them. They believed that if they didn't do that, they were going against God's will. They were afraid of being punished by God, and therefore had to punish me in order to do God's will. And so they were very mistaken about that, because God would never require anybody to hurt anybody. I had to look at this and say, well, I used to think that they interpreted it as sin by thinking they were in their right mind, they knew the truth, they were correct, and I was wrong, and they did this on purpose, and therefore they're evil, and therefore I hate them. And therefore I'm justified in anger, or I'm justified in not forgiving them. I had to look at the ways that they were simply mistaken, because I wasn't recognizing how they had made mistakes. I thought that their mistakes were sins. I thought that they were guilty of these sins. And it's not possible to forgive when you've given truth and reality to sin. You've made the illusion real, and now you can't be in a state of forgiveness. So as difficult as it was, I had to realize that even all the sense of being hurt and suffering and feeling pain, physical pain and emotional pain and rejection and abandonment and all the rest of it, I got away with being able to scapegoat the hell out of them for it. I was able to use it as a way to find them to be guilty and to keep them in my mind as a very handy scapegoat to put all of my guilt and my sin onto. I was mistaken to do that. And I was mistaken to do it because I didn't recognize that they were mistaken, and that all their behaviors, even if on the surface they seemed to be harmful, destructive behaviors, And even if I couldn't defend myself, and even if I should have gone somewhere else or whatever, they were not in their right mind. They cannot have done it on purpose because they were not in their right mind. I think in the Bible it says something like, forgive them for they know not what they do. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Where Jesus is basically saying that when you are mistaken, you are out of touch with reality and you are believing something that's false, and you sort of have lost touch with knowledge. You've gone into perception and you don't know. You think you know things that you don't know. You think things are true that aren't true. And then you act on the basis of those things, thinking that you have a firm footing and that you're valid and that this is reasonable, when in fact it's very mistaken. And so the people keep doing things that are harmful and destructive and abusive and even murderous by mistake, because they do not recognize what they're doing. If they really knew what they were doing, they would not do that. If they really were in touch with reality and they were clear-minded, sane people, fearless people, loving people, they would never ever abuse or attack. So the fact that they did means that they were not in their right mind. They didn't recognize what they were doing. They thought they were doing something else other than what they were doing. They thought they were providing correction. They were actually providing a mistake. They thought they were providing healing, correction, and education, when in fact they were taking me away from those things, because they were confused and they didn't know what the hell they were doing. Their whole rationale, the whole basis, the whole psychological, logical premise for why they acted this way was because they were mistaken about what was true, and they believed something that was false and they acted on it. Everybody expresses behavior and acts upon what they think is true and what they think, this is what's true for me, this is valid, this is justified, this is normal, this is natural, and we'll even freaking defend it. Everybody defends what they believe is true because it's their self. Whatever you believe is true, you think is true of you, and it defines you, and it's your identity. So if you will defend it as a way of defending your life, your identity, yourself, you will defend what you believe is true, even if it's mistaken. And then you will act on that, on the basis of it, having justified that it's totally correct to do this. So insane people justify insane behaviors, believing that they're not doing anything wrong. And this really leads to that when you recognize that it's all just mistakenness, there's no sin, there's no guilt, it's just people making some errors on their math test. Even the abusers are just very mistaken people. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. They don't even recognize what they're doing. They're not even in their right mind. They're insane. People that are murderous, serial killers, they are not in their right mind. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They think they're doing one thing while they're doing something else. They are very confused people. And you don't have to be around them necessarily if you choose not to, because they could potentially do very vicious things. They could attack you and try to kill you. So maybe it's wise not to be around them. This is part of why we have prisons, I suppose, for safety, public safety. But it's unforgiving of you to not recognize that they're just mistaken. When you recognize that it's only a mistake, this person has believed this by mistake, and then they believed that by mistake, and then they bought into this because of these things they believed, and now they believe this as well, and it's all kind of based on a big mistake, and they've gone down this long path of consequences of logical reasoning on a false premise, and have ended up in a state where they think they know what's true, and they're quite confused and distorted, and they act on it. They're not sinful. They're just mistaken. They've made an error. This is what Course in Miracles calls an error. And errors can be corrected without the need for making anyone guilty, without the need for any punishment, which would not be a correction anyway. It's the ego's version of atonement, that you have to pay for your sin, that if you suffer and die, it will pay for your sin, or it will correct your sin. The ego believes literally that if you suffer and you're sick and you die, you are atoning, and it makes you innocent. And therefore, because you're innocent in your death, because someone else gets to be the blame for it, you're exonerated, and it has made up for your sin. So you happily go die in order to be let off the hook. Which is insane, of course. It's totally insane to want to destroy yourself in order to give yourself innocence and preservation. When you recognize that people are just mistaken, you're acknowledging their innocence. Because say you're taking that math test and you innocently make a mistake, you just calculate something wrong and you come up with the wrong answer. You believe that it's the correct answer because you're confused. You don't understand the truth. It's just an innocent mistake. And if it's viewed as just a mistake, that can easily just be, the truth can be given, or the guidance or the learning or teaching can be given to help the person to come out of that mistaken state and to realize what the truth really is. It doesn't even go anywhere near guilt. It doesn't even go into punishment. It doesn't even approach unforgiving attitudes where it turns into a sin. It doesn't even convert the mistake into a sin. The Holy Spirit only sees that you are mistaken, you've made some errors, and you just need some help to get correct. And that applies to everyone, even if they're murderers. So, by recognizing the mistakes the person made as mistakes, as just errors that they made. Oh, I can see that, yeah. It's kind of like say you're at work and someone opens the fridge and takes out your piece of your lunch that they thought was part of their lunch, and they eat it. You come along and you're pissed because you think someone sinned against you on purpose just to piss you off, and you don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt, and then the person comes along and they suddenly realize that they ate your sandwich by mistake, and they're like, and they didn't even realize what they were doing, and it wasn't on purpose, and then you're like, oh, there's my sandwich, this one must be yours, I must have eaten yours by mistake, I'm sorry. In that kind of situation, you probably will say, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay, I'll just eat yours or something. you're willing to acknowledge that it was an innocent mistake and not a premeditated murder, because you can see the person was just mistaken. They mistook your thing for something it wasn't. They fell for an illusion, and so they did something wrong, but they didn't do it because they were evil. They did it because they just were making a mistake. And so you can acknowledge that they're still innocent, and you're willing to still love them because you recognize that it was just a mistake. Even if what they did, if framed in an unforgiving way, seems like it could have been a sin or a deliberate attack. You want to get out of that perception and get into the true perception, the accurate perception that this person has just made a bunch of errors. And this has to apply to everybody, even if someone is a freaking horrifying sinner, the motherfucking bastards, you just want to kill them because they have destroyed your life and made your life a misery, and you'll never be the same again. How dare they, those fucking assholes. All of that is unjustified. Even if it feels, I'm sure that sounds offensive, and it's people don't want to hear it, and it sounds like almost like it puts the finger on you and says you're the one that caused you to suffer. It's your fault that you were abused. You did it to yourself. You made yourself hurt. That's not going to come across very favorably to someone who is experienced abuse and who still is in it and is still unforgiving of it, who doesn't recognize the part they played in it, and doesn't recognize what they've done to themselves and why they used this abuser to get rid of their own guilt about attacking God, that they needed a scapegoat. I needed a scapegoat to get rid of my sin and guilt from my separation from God. I needed to position myself as a victim and be attacked unconsciously but willingly, so that I could then say, fuck you, you did this to me and it's your fault. Because then I can take my shit and my guilt and put it on them and disown it. And now I get away with it. I get away with murder by conveniently finding these people to be the ones who are guilty, the ones who are sinful, and I get to disown it and not be responsible. But if we're being very honest here, and I've looked at all this, I said, this is not impersonal, I've been through all this shit, and I've had to freaking find my way through it and find the truth. The truth is, I wanted to suffer. For some stupid reason, I was very mistaken, and I thought I deserved to suffer, and I arranged for a suffering scenario, and I hired the people, and I consented to it. As Jesus says in the Course, no one dies without their own consent. You have to have given permission to be attacked in order to be attacked. So we hire abusers, we hire victimizers to be the bad guy so that we can get away with having been the bad guy, positioning ourselves as the good guy, framing them as the one that's wrong so that we can go down in flames but be found guiltless. It's pretty twisted and it's very backwards, and it's difficult to go from you did this to me on purpose and it's all your fault to I did this to myself and I used you to hurt me so that I can get away with it. It's quite a stretch, but it's what you have to get to if you want to return to correction in the mind, right-mindedness, sanity, and healing. You have to get back to love. You can't stay in victim mode. You can't maintain hatred. You can't keep the finger pointing at the abuser. You can't keep finding them to be guilty and wrong. You can't even keep believing that they did this to you. Forgiveness recognizes that what you think your brother did has not occurred. Recognizing this is just a dream in which there are dream attacks against dream bodies. You are not a dream. You're not a body. You were never attacked. You are a mortal spirit. You can never be hurt. You've never been damaged. You are invulnerable, impenetrable, eternal. If it ever seems that you have been attacked, you must be mistaken about who you are and what you are and what's true of you. You're out of touch with the truth. And you can only suffer when you are mistaken and you're buying into the mistake and you're not forgiving it. You're not recognizing it as a mistake because you don't recognize the truth. So you're going into sin and guilt and punishment and suffering and eventually into death. So forgiveness through the Holy Spirit is purely the recognition of your permanent innocence and the innocence of everyone, including the people you hate and want to die. Everyone's innocence, because all they are is just a little bit mistaken. He recognizes that you have made an error, and he offers correction in a gentle, loving way that does not entail any kind of shame, guilt, unworthiness, and especially not punishment. It doesn't even go into sin, doesn't even encroach upon the possibility that there is sin anywhere. He just sees that there's illusion. You believe it, but it's not true. And you're mistaken. And through your willingness, through your little willingness to be mistaken, to recognize that you're mistaken, to acknowledge what the mistake is, to open up to correction and to receive the truth, to acknowledge God's truth is the only truth and I'm under no laws but God's, is you accepting the truth, and that acceptance of reality is going to allow your mind to become sane and healed and loving and forgiven. And your perception is going to shift to true perception, and you're going to become able to recognize and remember who you are and what's true about you as defined by God. And you will know that no one has ever done anything to you ever. So they cannot be guilty. You cannot be guilty. There is no sin. There is no death. There is no suffering. There's no pain. There's no murder. There's no sickness. There's no damage. There's no wounds. You are perfect in God. That is the ultimate awareness, the ultimate reality, the only truth. Anything else has to be a mistake. So essentially, there's no sin anywhere. The people that believe in it are mistaken. The people that believe in it are confused, and they don't realize that there's no sin. There is a lot of very, very mistaken people, but they are only mistaken. And they only need love to correct the mistake lovingly, with no guilt, no shame, no holding it against them, no finger pointing, no scapegoating, and especially no trying to make yourself look like you're suffering, sick, dying at the hands of someone else, so that you can frickin' accuse them in the worst way possible of your sin. probably still have to go through feeling your feelings. You still have to let out the pain. You still need to probably acknowledge what you think they did to you and the emotional impact that it seemed to have, and the physical stress and all the rest of it, and the trauma. You still gotta kind of work through it, but the more that you move towards forgiveness and recognizing mistakenness, it will accelerate that healing. It will unlock pain, it will remove suffering and sickness and symptoms, and it will heal you faster and undo what was done to you. As the Course says, must have made a wrong decision because I'm not at peace. I made the decision myself. I was mistaken. I made a wrong decision. I mistakenly chose to believe something that wasn't true. And I entered into illusion and started believing in sin. The Holy Spirit will undo all the consequences of my wrong decision if I will let Him. So even though I may have made a mistake and it may have produced consequences, even suffering, even sickness, even somebody abusing you, all the effects that were caused from mistakenness, from a mistaken decision, the Holy Spirit will undo all of that if you'll let Him. You choose to let Him by allowing Him to choose for God for you. In other words, accepting His truth, letting His decision for what's true be your decision, aligning yourself with reality, letting go of unforgiveness, and accepting atonement. And nowhere in there is there guilt. Nowhere in that prayer is there any suggestion that you have to suffer for the consequences that you've caused as a result of being mistaken, or anyone else, that no one else has to be guilty or punished because of being mistaken. There's no acknowledgement of sin anywhere. There's no sin. So the Holy Spirit only sees that you've just temporarily made a mistake and it just needs to be corrected, and you just need to be restored to your right-mindedness, and then everything's going to be fine. And doing this will completely wipe away all of the unfortunate, damaging, distorting, destructive consequences that are expressed when you weren't in your right mind. All of your sins, all of the consequences and effects will be undone, healed, corrected, and you will be cured of this abuse. You will be cured of this attack. You will be cured of your mistakenness and restored to your right mind, restored to sanity, happily recognizing that you are purely innocent and everyone else is also purely innocent. And then you will desire to bring love to others, to heal them of their mistakenness without judgment or guilt. All is forgiven and released. I'm going to stop now, and it's been, 2 hours and 9 minutes. This is a long one. I hope this was helpful, and it's been quite a journey. I'll talk to you again soon. God bless. Peace and love.